Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Immigration agents descend on a Humboldt Park institution, renewing fears among already anxious Chicagoans. The mayor and the governor warn of major fallout from President Trump's big beautiful bill, and Chicago Public Schools struggles to pay the bill for teacher raises. We're covering all that and much more tonight, and we've got a great panel to help us do it. They are Carrie Shepard from Axios Chicago, Nell Salzman from the Chicago Tribune, Sarah Karp from WBEZ, and Rufus Williams from WVON. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. West Side residents who were already hit hard during some historic flooding back in 2023, they said they haven't gotten the kind of help that they need from the city, and those same areas got hit again by storms and flooding this week. Some Austin residents held a press conference earlier today. Let's hear from Deborah Grant.
The incident of the flood that has taken place in the Austin district for the last 15 years is very inhumane to the residents that live there. After we finish cleaning up from one flood, then there's another flood. Our senior citizens, as has been stated, is still living in mold. If they're on a fixed income, there's no one to be able to come in and do it for free.
So, Rufus Williams, as extreme weather becomes more and more frequent, how much more difficult is it going to be, particularly for, as she mentioned, low-income folks or maybe people on a fixed income?
Well, it's so troubling that it's been this much time and they still haven't gotten anything from the last time. I mean, it begins there. And we see throughout the country these issues with weather, these issues with climate, and where do people go to find some relief? We've talked about this a little bit earlier, but there are no resources at any level of government, it seems, to help, but people still need help. So where do we go? Where do they turn? It's just extraordinarily frustrating to them, certainly, as we're just getting into the summer. We've had hot weather, we've got rain, there may be more storms tonight, and they're still trying to deal with things from before.
Well, I mean, how about that, Carrie Shepard? There have been questions about, federal responses, for example, to the deadly floods in Texas, both in terms of prediction as well as the recovery efforts. Should states and cities increasingly expect to be on their own here?
I think so, but actually Trump today actually visited Texas and finally backed off his claim that he wouldn't get rid of FEMA. He's been saying, even since before he was elected, that he would put FEMA more on the states. Of course, the states have their own FEMA department, but that these communities shouldn't rely so much on the federal government. It seems now that he's seen all the destruction in Texas that has happened from all the flooding there, that maybe he's backed off that claim a little bit. But, to your point, and to the West Side communities that can't catch a break, we're coming up on the anniversary of the historic 95 heat wave. And that is still an issue with, heat, is it still affects elderly people, low-income people who don't have air conditioning. This is going to continue to be a problem because of climate change. Yeah,
kind of getting into the point where we're looking more for adaptation rather than trying to stop
Absolutely.
it.
Right, it's just getting hotter and hotter out there, and I mean it's a huge problem. And even they were talking about whether we have adequate places open. It always kind of makes me laugh. Like they say, oh, you can go to a police station and sit there. I don't know. Just go sit at a police station and be like, oh, this is a good place to hang out. But
field houses, libraries.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
A little more welcoming.
Yeah. But what happens at night? I mean,
exactly.
That's the hard time.
Yeah, I remember back in 95, we did not have central air. We were sitting out in the backyard in our PJs because we were boiling hot inside.
Wow.
It can be pretty tough.
I wasn't born yet, Nick.
Yes, as the elder on this panel, I recall it well. Well, we mentioned at the top earlier this week, federal agents descending on Chicago's Puerto Rican Arts and Culture Museum. That drew a sharp rebuke from some local leaders. Here's a bit of what Alderman Anthony Casada had to say. Alderman Casada, you know, making remarks alongside several other local leaders, saying they're just here to bully and intimidate. That this was not any sort of a legitimate enforcement effort, rather that they were here to sort of strike fear into the community. Nell Salzman, what exactly do we know about what agents were doing at the museum there?
DHS officials told the Tribune in an email that they were there for a narcotics operation. under the Department of Homeland Security's investigative branch. And basically that's what they said, though elected officials in Chicago are kind of skeptical of that, knowing that that sometimes there have been not an alignment in factualities coming from the Department of Homeland Security. So, yeah.
What did we hear from folks at the museum about what agents on site were doing?
So from the hours of 3 to 5 p.m. on Tuesday, 15 unmarked vehicles came into the parking lot, and DHS, officials were milling about and even tried to enter the building at one point. And I was at the press conference the following day when Anthony Casada was speaking, and local officials there in the museum were saying that museum officials were really, really, upset and nervous, and basically they thought that they were looking for exits and entrances for the upcoming festivals that are happening in Humboldt Park that will draw a lot of predominantly Latino crowds, and those crowds are undocumented, and there's been sweeps across the country in Los Angeles and just a visible presence, so that stoked a lot of fear.
Well, I mean, a few weeks back, Sarah Karp, we saw ICE tell people to appear for what they thought was a routine appointment and then detain them. I mean, given that, do you think residents are going to believe what DHS says about why they were present at the museum?
No, and I think that, Nell covers immigration a lot more than I do, but from what I'm hearing, I mean, people are just scared, and people are just staying in their homes. There's even, some efforts that I've heard of where teachers are bringing food to families because families just don't want to go out, but they also don't know what to do when it comes to going to these court hearings, because it's one of those things where you're sort of in, you might be in trouble if you go, but you're definitely going to be in trouble if you don't go. And so you hear just a lot of people out there just don't know what to do right now. And some people just leaving because, if you can go to a different country, even if it's not the place where you come from, it might be safer than staying here and risking being deported and separated from your children.
Yeah, this seems to be clearly a bout of intimidation. And Tom Homan has said, they have said Chicago is going to be ground zero when they come in. I hope that someone let ICE know that Puerto Rico is a jurisdiction of the United States.
That's what I was thinking.
And so the people there are probably citizens, so why you go there can be nothing other than to go there to intimidate and otherwise try to keep people from coming out any place. When they start to throw out the kinds of numbers that they want to do with deportation, and they start talking about criminals and others, the numbers just don't make any sense. So this is one of the things that Trump ran on and they continue to push. I don't know for sure that they know that Puerto Rico is a jurisdiction, because the president did not know that English is the language of Liberia.
Right.
So who knows what they actually know, but this is clearly all about intimidation.
Yeah, to Sarah's point, I mean, is this putting teachers, museum workers on the front lines with law enforcement? Another really concerning part of this is that Nell, you covered this, is that some of these museum workers were saying they didn't identify themselves, which is what law enforcement has to do. We do have rules in place. Cops have to show their badge. They have to say they are law enforcement. So that's putting these people who are not normally used to maybe doing that, because, of course, Humboldt Park is a Puerto Rican neighborhood, so maybe they wouldn't be expecting to be dealing with DHS as much. But I've also heard all the stories. I mean, the Catholic Church for the first time ever told people they didn't have to go to church on Sunday because of fears of raids. And that is huge. That's a big deal. If you can't even go to your place of worship, you can't go to school, where do you go? Yeah,
which in some senses, to Sarah's point about folks leaving,
right,
there has been, the administration has sort of expressed that as the intent, that they want to create an environment of discomfort for folks. Another of the president's major policies on immigration, birthright citizenship, a federal judge has for now paused that executive order. But of course, that could be in conflict with a Supreme Court ruling from last month that limits the ability of judges to issue a nationwide injunction. Nell, you spoke with some Chicagoans who are watching the issue of birthright citizenship very closely. What did you hear from them?
Pregnant mothers without legal status told me last week that they were really worried because there was so much uncertainty. And this New Hampshire federal court ruling does mitigate some of that uncertainty, but people are still in limbo, right? As you said, Nick, you summarized it quite well. it does seem like it's paused the Birthright Citizenship executive order for now. The question is, what's going to happen in the, right after the appeals process, throughout the appeals process, and how is the Supreme Court going to rule, or how are they going to decide on birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment? I thought it was so interesting that birthright citizenship, under the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment just celebrated its 157th anniversary. And I think that is something that, thinking about how much the 14th Amendment has changed and where we're at now is something to think about.
Yeah, you have to imagine it's going to end up at the Supreme Court pretty quickly based on the potential conflict there. Well, speaking of some other of the administration's signature actions, the Big Beautiful Bill, Mayor Brandon Johnson did not mince words this week, expressing his opinions about that measure. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
This is an abomination. This is sinful. It's unholy. This bill is a fundamental attack on our democracy and our way of life.
Carrie, the governor saying this week he expects some 360,000 Illinoisans to lose food assistance because of the bill, among a myriad of other fallouts. How much can the state or the city do to pick up the slack there?
Well, not much. We were talking before we went live about all the pressure on the state right now with CPS's budget coming up short, with you, as you know very well, you and I report on transit, with the transit budget, the fiscal cliff coming for there. So how much can the state pick up? Who knows? I mean, Mayor Johnson has said before, and many leaders have said this, that budgets are moral documents. And so when a public official says, puts into a budget that some, 300,000 people will lose food assistance in the next decade, I think it's upwards of maybe 50,000 people will lose their Medicaid coverage. That's making a moral statement. And of course, Trump has come after, of course, Pritzker and Johnson are very vocal about their opposition to Trump. But, it's not just Democrats either. I mean, you have Republicans across the country, too, who say, look, I'm in a I represent a rural district. My district is going to be hit with Medicaid cuts. A lot of elderly people in my district are going to be cut. So it's not just a completely, red and blue issue.
I am wondering at some point if some of the calls for Pritzker, this week the Chicago Teachers Union had a press conference saying that Pritzker needs to do something. Pritzker needs to step in. And, I know people don't want to be taxed more, but I do wonder if at some point they're going to have to figure out how to get some revenue so that we can mitigate these cuts. I mean, it's one thing to talk about how horrible it is that people are losing health care or that people are not being able to access food. But in the end, someone's got to do something. Someone's got to put some money there. Right. And I just wonder, at some point, someone's got to step in. But
it's so challenging when you mention even in the red states, they're concerned about these things. In the rural areas, they're concerned about these things. Yet they still vote for them.
Right.
They still vote for them.
Political blowback.
Right, and how it impacts all of their people.
Yeah, and that's a lot of these policies won't go into play until after the midterm, so they will have a chance. Democrats won't have a chance to say, look, this is affecting you now, because if it's not right in front of people, people will forget.
And this becomes, so often we talk about the fact that all politics are local, but this is a federal thing that has a tremendous impact on where we are. And Trump said very clearly when he talked about California versus Texas, that he's much more inclined to do things for people that he likes. And he doesn't like the people in California, but he likes the people in Texas. And he clearly doesn't like the people in Illinois or Chicago. And so from that lens, we wouldn't expect anything except we still pay federal taxes. And the people who are there in Washington have to protect the people in these places.
It'll be very interesting to see whether they potentially walk back some of these cuts down the road. Sarah, speaking of the teachers union, teachers are owed some retroactive pay bumps under their most recent contract deal. How's the school district doing coming up with all that money?
Well, actually, just today, I saw that the new interim CEO sent an email to teachers saying that we're working this out. We're going to hope to get you your money by August 8th, at least. This is because the teacher's contract was negotiated up until April, even though it expired back in June. So they're owed about a year's worth of raises, which is 4% cost of living plus other raises that people get. And so they're waiting for their money. I think the real story here, though, is how tight CPS's budget is. I mean, it's never been this tight.
I was just going to ask.
It's never been, and I'm talking about like cash flow tight.
Right.
At the board meeting, at the agenda board meeting, which is like a pre-board meeting on Wednesday, the chief financial officer just offhandedly mentioned that this year CPS ended with a $19 million deficit, which is really shocking because it usually, I mean, Rufus will know this, Rufus was board president for a while, usually they end with a couple $100 million in the bank. So even though $19 million is not huge in a $10 billion budget, it still shows like how close to, you know, to the...
Yeah, and it's on the wrong side of the ledger.
Right.
Yes,
So it's a deficit.
right.
And what they're holding off for is getting the money in from property taxes from the county, which again, with anybody's budget, that's money that's going to be needed going forward as well. When they have the deficit that they have, and as the new CEO came in and gave the $734 million deficit, including the money from the pensions, which the previous CEO said that's not ours, but they've now picked that up while they already have this huge deficit. It does not bode well for the finances of the Chicago Public Schools.
And property taxes, our second installments have been delayed, so it's going to be kicked down the road even further.
Right, and then when they come in, if you've already committed that money,
They've already spent it. They've already spent it. That's the problem.
And if anyone was following the big fight over the pension, payment, the $175 million pension payment, the city dipped into its reserves there to pay that, and that's still undecided. So I think it's going to be a pretty nasty budget fight.
Yeah, there appears to be just structural deficits everywhere.
Right.
And there's structural deficits without a desire to cut. And the revenues aren't coming from Springfield. And we just talked about how they're not coming from Washington. So something big has got to happen.
Well, and speaking of cuts, I mean, we just saw some folks at CPS get a pink slip today. Now, what are the details there?
So CPS laid off as part of its general kind of process in assessing enrollment and different needs in the district, laid off 1,400 staff members. It's a little bit more than last year, but what district officials told me and my colleague, and probably Sarah too, is that it's routine and normal, and so we're really looking to see if there's going to be more cuts coming, mid-year layoffs and stuff like that.
Yeah, these layoffs don't even help the deficit. So the deficit, they said $734 million. They've found about $165 million worth of savings, but these layoffs are just par for the course.
And they say it's routine and normal, except these are not normal times.
Yeah.
And so, the more cuts you have, how do you reinstall those in places where you may not need them? And they do say, historically, 80% of the people who were laid off or cut find jobs back in the system. But they also cut jobs out of the system before coming up to now. So we'll have to see how this actually comes out, because I really believe in order to right size, there's going to be some significant impact on CPS as we look forward.
Yeah, even if these cuts are part of the sort of normal process of making sure everything's working right, you have to imagine it just sort of ups the anxiety for families, for staffers, for teachers at a time like this. Well, Alderman Walter Bernett announced he is retiring at the end of the month, and he hopes his son will replace him. His other son's busy serving in the General Assembly. Is it good, Rufus, to have someone who sort of grew up with a front row seat to the city council, or is this sort of Chicago political nepotism? Or both?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Absolutely it is. It is Chicago political nepotism. It is someone who has seen it all. And the question is, what do the people want? I mean, we understand what the alderman wants. We do still ask, it seems like an odd time to decide not to be an alderman anymore. So all the things that were there some time ago, but now the son comes up to be we've seen this video before. Right. And will it happen? Chicago.
Yeah. And yeah, Alderman Bernett potentially in line, hoping to be the next leader of the Chicago Housing Authority. So we will see how that plays out.
Yeah, one of the top people there, he was vice mayor. And as he shared with me when he was on with me recently, there's only one vice mayor in Chicago. There are 5 deputies, but only one vice mayor.
And don't you forget it.
Right, that's right.
Make sure you don't mess it up, because I certainly called him deputy mayor. So yeah, it's an interesting time to step down, but it also gives the front runner the opportunity to be the front runner from the next election. So it's the Chicago way.
Time-honored tradition.
I don't think Walter Bernett will have any trouble finding work to do with, even if he doesn't lead up CHA, which, as he's made very clear, he wants to do. He's led huge development on the west side. He's been there for 40 years. We have Bally's Casino. He knows how to grow things, so I'm sure he will. He knows very well what he's doing, so I'm sure he will have plenty of opportunities.
It made friends in the process.
Yep,
absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
Well, speaking with some council news, or a former member, Alderman Carrie Austin, a federal judge, has found that she is too sick to stand trial on bribery charges. Now, we were talking earlier, you're spoiling all the secrets, that means she can keep collecting her monthly pension payments of more than $9,500, which a conviction would have halted. Carrie, how do you think taxpayers are going to take that news, or are they maybe not paying super close attention to that?
They're probably not. I mean, admittedly, I'm embarrassed to say I wasn't thinking about it till you brought it up, because obviously Alderman Burke, the former Alderman Burke, he was released after 9 months of a 2-year sentence this week. And so, I think when anybody ever hears that somebody is older, a senior, and not having to put them through a trial, yes, as the judge said, you won't, the public won't get to see if this person gets a guilty verdict for what is, allegedly corruption. She also won't get the option to be, proven not guilty if indeed she fights that. But I don't think anybody's going to celebrate an older person is too sick to sit on trial. But yeah, I mean, she gets to keep her pension. I'm sure that the old Chicago way, nobody's happy when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about, Alderman Ed Burke getting out after just 9 months, I mean, sort of same question now. I mean, is the average resident upset about that, or have, the news cycles moved on, people have moved on, they've kind of forgotten about Burke?
We were just talking before this about, how Burke is 81 years old, Michael Madigan in his 80s as well. And I think that, Madigan and all of these other, people who have been indicted and especially Burke, but Madigan getting out, I apologize. Burke getting out. His name's getting.
Madigan hasn't gone in yet.
I think that people, it was obviously a very maybe not unexpected decision considering his age and also just the ability of being in jail at that point in your life.
Yeah.
But Nick, to your point earlier, we're all talking about unprecedented times, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about really serious issues of people could be losing their health care coverage and people could be losing food assistance. So do people care if it's 9 months versus 2 years? I don't know.
And maybe if she had gotten as much money as Burke and Madigan, then it would be okay that she wouldn't get her pension. But I think the infractions that they've had were substantially different in terms of dollars.
Getting home renovations, things like that.
It wasn't a lot.
Yeah, I guess we should just air the pre-show. We talked about all the good stuff.
That's right.
Maybe this needs to be an hour, Nick, is what we're hearing.
Are you listening, bosses?
Are you listening?
Well, Carrie, you got to check out something that I'm very jealous about, the new Chicago Board of Trade Museum.
Oh, yes, I did.
This is part of the sort of hoped-for revival along LaSalle Street. What's it like? What'd you see there?
It's actually quite cool. It's very small. Obviously, this is a historic building, this Art Deco building that everybody sees on the Chicago architecture tour. But this is sort of a celebration, in the words of Alderman Conway, of capitalism. And that wasn't my word. That wasn't my phrase. But this is actually, it's a history of the Board of Trade. You can pick up a phone and hear some former traders, their memories of being in the pits, and let's be clear, even before the pandemic, the Board of Trade was changing a lot. A lot of trading moved electronically. People weren't, in the pits throwing up their hands as much, but there are videos of that as well. But, the larger point being that, it's the financial district everywhere, but especially in Chicago, looks very different than it did before the pandemic. You have fewer people coming in because they can work from home, so they're not going to come in on Mondays and Fridays Fridays maybe. So the argument being from officials, this is an arts and culture attraction that will bring people into the area, then they'll spend money at restaurants and drink and et cetera, and that's all part of developing the area.
Yeah, this big hoped for revitalization along LaSalle Street.
Of course.
Well, you were all in the pit with us tonight and you all did great, but we are out of time. So our thanks to Carrie Shepard, Nell Salzman, Sarah Karp, and Rufus Williams. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Stay connected with our newsroom by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. Okay, now what I want to learn is how do you do all those hand signals that the traders did? Absolutely.
There's an actual book that shows you and teaches you all the signals, and there's a video that will show you how sort of the architecture of the building played into the pits, and it has all the traders with their jackets. It's free. It's
You needed to
free.
have been born earlier.
It's free.
You missed all the fun stuff.
I missed the good stuff.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that contributes to public safety policy and guidelines.